This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. So, I'm trying something completely different for the very first time today. I'm actually recording the latest episode of this podcast live on Instagram. I was talked into this. I'm not sure yet if it's going to be a good idea or not, but here we are. And today on this show, we are going to be talking about your dating questions. I'm going to be tackling some of the complexities of dating because, there can be a little bit more to it than just getting a date and meeting a nice person and riding off into the sunset. And I wanted to talk about this today because I've been getting a lot of really, really good questions from my listeners. So I'm going to be tackling some of these questions for you. I have a number of questions that have come in ahead of time that I'm going to be addressing. But if you have questions for me that I can answer in real time on the show, I'm also happy to do that. So anyway, let's get started. So first of all, I got a wonderful note from Miss J, who brought up a really interesting issue, and I wanted to talk about this because I think a lot of people can relate to what's going on. But actually, you know what? Before I dive into her question, I do also just want to add briefly just a note of caution here. In my work as a counselor and a coach at Growing Self, When people come in with things on their mind, I have the luxury of being able to really get to know them, so people don't come in for the first time and plop down on my couch and say, okay, here's what's going on. And I say, okay, here's what you do. No, it's not like that. We enter into a period of assessment, which could even be 4, 5, 6 sessions sometimes where I'm asking them questions about their experiences and their lives and their histories. And we're doing oftentimes a relationship inventory and gathering a lot of data so that we can put their questions and their experiences in context of who they are as people, their personalities, their core beliefs, and some of the unique challenges that they've experienced that really kind of fill in the gaps that help me be able to create not just an answer, but a meaningful growth experience. And so I just wanted to say that for the purposes of these kinds of questions on the podcast, I don't know the people asking these questions. I don't have that insight and that background and that history. So what I'm going to be sharing are just my thoughts, and I don't want any of this to be taken as, okay, this is what I should do, because I don't know really without the opportunity to do that deep dive with people. So that is my big disclaimer. Don't make any major life decisions based on what I say here in this podcast, because this isn't the same thing as private therapy or coaching. But with that in mind, let's tackle our very first question. So Miss J wrote in and shared, Dr. Lisa, I just turned 40 this summer. Around this time, I was sadly becoming aware that most of the people around me in their 30s and 40s are part of a couple and have been for a long time. In fact, most of my friends have been married for 10, 15, or heck, even 20 years. She goes on, she says, I've been the bubbly and vivacious one all my life and was always optimistic about love. In fact, in my 20s and 30s, I always felt so confident that someone would walk into my life any second. Meanwhile, over the next 2 decades, people were actually meeting their significant others, becoming boyfriend and girlfriend, getting engaged, getting married, buying houses, starting families. But now I feel as if I've lost 20 years of life and love. While people around me were going on this journey that I described above, I was going through life alone, and I still am today. Fingers crossed that I would meet someone too. This upsets me so much right now that I refuse to hang out with couples. right now. I even get inwardly upset when someone mentions we, as in we ate here, we did this, like we're going here, because I don't have a we. Things that used to make me happy no longer do. Traveling, adventuring, experiencing new things, and mainly because I would rather be doing these things with a significant other instead of trying to convince girlfriends to leave their boyfriends or husbands to come and take a trip with me, or just hanging out with single people. Now I am starting to feel this panic that I'm going to be going through my life without someone until I'm an old lady, and I'm feeling extremely unlovable. I'm starting to look at couples and sometimes other women with disdain. For example, I think, I take care of myself, I work out, I'm fun and vivacious, I'm adventurous. Why doesn't someone love me? And yet that girl over there, the total opposite of me, she has someone that loves her. So she writes on, she says, I hope I'm not complaining. I'm usually a very resourceful and resilient person and have done a lot to help my situation. I've even recently moved to a new city just 2 weeks ago, solely with the intention to start anew. I do personal growth work, I'm sociable, I'm extroverted, and I try to make new friends. But this situation is really bringing me down. Not even a new city and the idea of new friends is exciting for me. And moving on without a partner is pretty distressing. No one to get excited with or look for apartments with or explore the neighborhood with or help me move things, lift heavy boxes, paint furniture. So my goal, I don't want to be happy being single. That's what got me here in the first place. I want to be able to accept that I have been single for the last 2 decades and not let this depress me like it is now. I want to have the courage and optimism to move forward. If you could discuss this issue, it would be greatly appreciated. I feel like this is turning into a ugly cycle for me, and I need to get out of this. And she also writes, it's getting to such a negative place that I don't even want to go into dating when I'm feeling so anxious about being single. So first of all, Miss J, thank you so much for getting in touch and doing such a great job of communicating in a very authentic and heartfelt way what this experience has been like for you. And I am hearing so many really poignant things in your story. And I wanted to talk about this because I think a lot of people who are out there dating are oftentimes experiencing the same thing. Like, you know, they're going out there, they're going on dates, they're meeting new people, but on the inside, oh, and we have an Instagram live participant who says, I can relate. I understand how she feels. Yeah, I think a lot of people can, you know, like there's the active part where you're going out on dates and meeting people, but there's like this emotional reality on the inside that's kind of like behind the scenes of the public face of dating. And I think that you captured it really so beautifully, is that a lot of people, when they date, they are doing so with a sadness inside of them and anxiety. You know, they're dating because they don't want to be single. Maybe they're not really that happy, but then that creates a challenge when you go out and date and, you know, trying to be your best self and this like happy, optimistic person, when there's a certain level of like sadness and anxiety behind that public facade, right? So anyway, you know, one of the things that I was sitting with as I was reading your question, and full disclosure here, you know, I am a licensed psychologist and have a background, you know, as a therapist, but I think part of the reason why I personally have kind of moved away from that discipline and into more of a coaching sphere is because when I look at your question through like a therapist kind of lens, you know, that discipline would probably encourage you to be happy on your own, like process that grief. And, you know, like there's a certain level of almost like pathologizing negative emotions and like, okay, let's talk about your sadness, aka depression, and let's talk about the anxiety with the intention of making that less, you know? And I fundamentally disagree with that approach. And again, I think this is why I've kind of gravitated towards life coaching over the years, is because my way of working with this is to say, no, what would happen if we started listening to these feelings and really taking information from them. Like, Miss J, when I read what you shared, what stands out to me is that being in a high quality relationship with somebody that you can share a life with is probably your most important heartfelt value. And that because of that, and the fact that you aren't in a relationship right now, it's creating a lot of sadness and distress. And like that your pain around that is like your emotional guidance system telling you that this needs to change. And so, like, what if we were to embrace this and use this pain as motivation and get really, really, really serious about creating different circumstances for yourself and your life? I mean, like, for example, if you lost your job and were unemployed, and every aspect of your life was being negatively impacted because of that. Everything from lack of financial resources to, feeling like kind of adrift in the world and not being able to fulfill your purpose occupationally. That would be like a 5-alarm fire. And you would, my guess, particularly the way that you described yourself as being a very proactive, motivated, high energy person, you would be working at that night and day. My guess is that you would probably be talking to a career coach, you'd be working on resumes, you would be looking at every single job board in the history of existence, and you would be networking, and that would be your job, is to create a different occupational situation. And I wonder what would happen if you, instead of like shifting into this like discouragement, this is my lot in life, I just need to get used to being alone, shifted back out to this, no, I'm not doing this. I want to be coupled more than anything in the world, and it is so important to me that I'm going to put all of my energy into creating a different reality for yourself. And so then that might mean getting involved in every, singles opportunity that there is, going to all the meetups and joining the groups and joining clubs and getting on every, online app, and really doing everything in your power to be putting yourself out there. And also, though, I think that part of this is going to require shifting your state, because what I'm sort of hearing between the lines here, and this is certainly like without the benefit of knowing you and being able to ask you about this, right? But like shifting away from this anxiety and like sadness that's kind of coming over this, like this is what I have to accept, and really shifting out to this new mindset, which would be like, I am on a mission. And also, very deliberately, I think as part of this, understanding that successful modern dating is a numbers game. That, among other things, you are going to have to meet a lot of people. Like, if you started saying to yourself, like, I am going to go on 100 dates. I am going to date 100 people before I meet my person. And this is simply what is required. This is. And, working as a dating coach and walking with people along this path, you would be shocked at how long it can take and how many people you have to meet and connect with in order to find the one. I think that one of the limiting beliefs that can really get in people's way is this idea that there is this one person and there's a soulmate and they're just gonna you're going to find them, and that it should almost be easier than it actually is. And so when they cycle through, starting to date a few people and it lasts a couple months and then fizzles out, it turns into this idea that something is wrong. Or I'm unlovable, or, this is never going to work, when in reality it's like, no, this is actually what it is, and so I think shifting into that mindset might also be really, really helpful to you. And now, if we were working together one-on-one, other things that I would want to just check in about is taking a look at your relationship history, because you mentioned, having had a couple of relationships that didn't work out. But in order to prevent you from having those same experiences potentially again, I'd be asking you questions like, let's talk about the kind of people that you're looking for or that you're going for. Who are you attracted to? Is there anything there that it could be worth examining? And also, I think sometimes with successful dating, there is a tendency to have blind spots. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And I think that sometimes when people have like kind of a long pattern of having the same kinds of experiences and relationships over and over again, that can be indicative of the types of people that they are going for that aren't really like the best match for them, I should say. But also sometimes that people have ways of relating that they might not be fully aware of, maybe how other people are experiencing them. Again, it's nothing bad, but it's just like on that path of self-awareness, there can be a lot of growth around that. So, but those are my thoughts. I mean, just plan on dating 100 different people in your new city. It sounds like you're in a great place to do that. Shifting that mindset into, I feel bad because this is actually really important to me. And so this is my mission in life, and I'm going to work at this like this is my job, and I'm not going to stop until I find my person. Yeah. And so say yes to everything and everyone, and join every meetup and do everything you can. But I would caution you around, like, as you date, be going out to coffee with people and not having it turn into like sexual situations or kind of moving more quickly into a deeper level of intimacy, because my goodness, you have to do that with 100 people. And, so be going slow. And I bet if you really work at this, you might be surprised. So anyway, keep in touch with me. Let me know what happens. That I'll be waiting to hear back. Okay, so I'm just going to check in to see what people on Instagram are having to say. So there's another question here. Do you think dating apps like Tinder are a viable option? I do actually think that online dating apps can be really helpful, because, I mean, this is the way that people meet each other these days. I think that a lot of people are on these apps. I think that different apps sort of have like different cultural norms, and not always, but I think that people who are looking for more casual situations might be on Tinder, where I think that people who are more seriously minded when it comes to, no, I'm actually looking for a relationship, could be on some different sites. I've had clients who've had really good experiences with Match.com. Hinge can be a good one. Bumble. There are a few others like that. So, but there's certainly no harm in participating in all of them if you're serious about dating. And again, I don't know that strictly online dating is a substitute for in real life opportunities to meet people, because I think that it's a different experience when you meet someone in person, and also meeting people locally, meeting people who kind of hang out at the same place as you are. There's natural opportunities to have like a higher degree of similarity there. So it is not a substitute, but it can be very, very, very helpful, just because you're going to meet so many more people and have so many more options if you are participating in online apps as well. So thank you for the question. So here's another question. So a listener, Mr. R, got in touch with another question, which again, it's a little bit more complex. So I wanted to share it with you guys. But he writes, Dr. Lisa, I am dating a wonderful woman who went through something similar to me. She was blindsided by a divorce. She also has children. We both have good jobs. We're both struggling with co-parenting, and we have exes in the picture, and we've both been hurt badly. My friends tell me I shouldn't get serious, as we're both two wounded puppies latching on to each other, which I disagree with. But there's a part of me that thinks there might be a bit of truth to what they're saying. So my question is, should I trust my heart, or should I be worried about this? And so I think, again, kind of reading between the lines a little bit here, I think the primary question is related to like, how do I know if I'm jumping into the dating pool too soon after a traumatic breakup or divorce? And also with someone who might also be jumping in too soon. Like, how do you know if like the timing is okay or if we're doing this a little bit prematurely? And again, without the benefit of really knowing both of you and more about the dynamics of the situation, I would say, there are pros and cons to everything. Like, so many few things are like all good or all bad. It's really like there's light and dark in all things, right? And so a lot of positives in this situation. I mean, some of the pros, it sounds like you have met someone that you are really feeling connected with and that they are good company. There's companionship. But there's also like this quality of what you're describing, like a safe harbor in the storm, someone who understands you and someone who has compassion and empathy for what you're going through, and there is so much to be said for that because, people who haven't gone through what you're going through, it can be hard for them to really understand the complexities and the stressors of this type of situation. And to meet someone who really gets it on a deep level, that is worth a lot. And I think I'm also hearing in there that you are enjoying each other's company. And how wonderful, because you've probably both been through the ringer with everything that you've been through. And to have something positive in your life, I think that is wonderful. I really do. And if it's working, I think that's worth a lot, is just to pay attention to that. Now, if I were your counselor, your life coach, I would also, in the back of my mind, kind of be wondering about, are there other things going on inside of both of you that dating each other may potentially be distracting you away from? Because here's why. You have both been through a pretty major trauma, a divorce that was surprising to you. And there is always a lot of personal growth work that needs to be done on the other side of those situations, working through a lot of painful feelings, certainly related to the split. Also figuring out a lot of like, what's my new normal for myself and my children, but also doing some relational autopsy work around why did this happen? What was going on in the relationship prior to our getting a divorce? Because, and I mean this respectfully, people do feel blindsided by breakups. And if I was sitting in the room with you and your ex would be telling me that there were months, possibly years of build up to this, where they probably were trying to, for a while at least, work on the relationship, communicate about your feelings, and it was being missed. And that fact right there makes me wonder if it's worth spending some time on yourself to figure out what happened that I missed that, because that hasn't changed by virtue of the fact of the divorce, right? It's like without doing that work, you carry those same patterns into the next relationship. And so the fact that potentially you and this woman that you're now dating were missing these communication from your exes, or these relationship warning signs, or potentially minimizing them, there's a good chance that you guys might start doing that with each other at some point. So that's the type of personal growth work that's really essential to do, I think, before you dive too deeply into a new relationship. Because if you just kind of like click with a new person, like, okay, great, it's working, we're moving on, you really lose the opportunity to think about that and to get that kind of self-awareness. So yeah, I mean, those are the pros and cons. Pros is that it's great and a good time, and if it's working, why not? Cons, make sure that you're still doing that growth work, because if you do, there's a much greater likelihood of this relationship becoming the positive and enduring relationship that it sounds like you really want it to be. So there's that. Okay, so moving on to another question. I had another person write in with a question about when to tell kids that you're dating someone new. This is a little bit of a complex situation, but I think that there are a lot of similarities to what many people deal with, who are dating with kids. But the question, he says, Dr. Lisa, would you be able to advise on, or maybe do a podcast addressing the topic of when is the right time to tell the children if you're dating a new person after a divorce? This situation is a little bit more complex because this relationship has been going on for quite some time, but the person that he's dating has not revealed their relationship to their children or other friends and family. So to talk kind of more high level on this topic, in general, there are some things that wise people should always consider when they're dating as single parents. So, in general, people have different priorities and should have different priorities when they are dating as a parent. And really that involves putting your children's needs first, because kids have also been through a lot. I think that children are resilient, and research shows that there is not much different in outcomes years down the line after a divorce. However, there's also research that shows that for the first few years after a family breaks up and parents divorce, it is actually a very difficult time for children emotionally. They often kind of slide academically, and they can really be struggling. And so I think as a parent, to be very sensitive to who your children are and what they are needing, and that it is absolutely okay to be prioritizing their needs and feelings for a little while before jumping into a new relationship. I think that's okay. And as a single parent, I think that it's very important to be dating from a position of strength and fulfillment. People run into trouble in general when they are dating from a position of being overly eager to be in a relationship with just anybody. And right after a divorce especially, there can be a strong pull to connect with someone for no other reason than the fact that you're used to being coupled, that you have organized your life around couplehood. It feels very familiar to be doing things with other people. And so that can be a risk of parents dating. And so to be able to slow down, go back to what I was talking about above. You're going to date 100 people. So settle in and slow down and be very, very patient, and really be thinking about character over chemistry, particularly around what kind of person are they, not just for me, but to have in the lives of my children. So being very cautious to look at things like, how do they handle stress? What do they do when they are annoyed or upset? Are they talking about their feelings in a respectful way, or are they slamming doors and stomping around and screeching off in their car? Thinking about it's not just how people are when they're on their best behavior and on a date. It's character is revealed over time and by the way that people handle challenging things. So be watching for that kind of stuff, and I would be doing this well before I introduced them to my children, certainly. I would be waiting at least months, and I would be very cautious about introducing my kids who have already been traumatized by a significant loss to any new person that I wasn't pretty damn sure I wanted to be with. So there would be a lot of vetting and a lot of carefulness before I brought that person into my child's life. Also, I would encourage you to be very respectful about what you've each been through in terms of the loss and the trauma, and do not skimp on the time and energy that you're putting into that personal growth work to think about, what happened in that past relationship, who was I in that past relationship, and whatever you do, especially when you're dating with children, do not date optimistically. I think a lot of people do this, especially women. They meet a person, man or woman, and they think, I really like them. They have so many great things going for them. There's this stuff over here that I don't actually love, but that's probably just circumstantial. And if they had love in their life and were happier, they wouldn't be drinking so much, or they would be, different in this way. And so in that way, they date very optimistically, thinking that in the future, the things that they're seeing that they aren't that happy about might be different. And that is a mistake. I think that particularly when you are a parent, you need to be dating very realistically and making the default assumption that what you see is what you get, and that they're probably always going to be the way that they are now. And also paying a lot of attention to any warning flags that you see around things related to character, temperament, etc. So those are all things that I would be thinking about. And then there is, all other kinds of things that would come into play if/when you did bring someone into your child's life, in terms of what is that role going to look like and what is it not going to look like. I think that one of the biggest reasons why second marriages fail is because there is a lack of clarity around those roles, and step parents who try to step into a parental role as opposed to simply being a friendly adult in their partner's children's lives. It is explosively bad most of the time. And so to be being very, very careful about having those conversations around these are boundaries and, all of that before moving forward into a second marriage. But the question was, for my listener, my person that I'm dating, we're on a multi-year dating relationship so far. She hasn't told her kids. She hasn't told anybody else about me. What should I do? Right? And so with all of those things that I just described in mind, what I would be thinking about is actually something that I had a very wise, wonderful supervisor tell me years and years ago. And she said, the only time that people really don't make sense is when you don't have all the information. I took that to heart as a counseling student back in the day, and it's something that I still think of frequently, and I have found clinically that is almost always true. And so in this situation, this person with the question is saying, why is this happening? Why is someone not telling her children about me, even though it's upsetting me? What I would be wondering about and wanting to learn more about is it possible that there are things happening on her side of the equation that you don't know about, Maybe she is not as serious about you as you are about her. Maybe, given, all the things that I talked about, she does have concerns about your being in the life of her children. Maybe she has observed things in you or in the relationship that have made her think, yeah, I think we're going to wait and see about this. Or maybe she is not as committed to a future with you as you would like her to be. Does she have feelings still for her ex? Is there a part of her that is hopeful that they might be able to work things out? I mean, I have no idea, but this again is me absolutely speculating and without the benefit of being able to sit down and talk with you. But I would think that there's something else going on that you're not knowing, potentially. Maybe her child was super traumatized by the whole divorce, and she's very connected to what her child is needing and knows that it wouldn't be good for her kid. And she's prioritizing the needs and feelings of her child over your needs and feelings. And again, I as a mother, I can understand that. And I can also understand how, from your perspective, if you are dating someone who is really not emotionally available to be the kind of partner that you would like her to be, that it's also okay for you to make other choices for yourself. You don't have to keep trying to make this particular thing work. I mean, that's the reason why we date, is to get to know other people. And if what you have learned is that this isn't what you want it to be, it's also okay to decide to do something different. But, so one possible recommendation, though, is to simply sit down and have an honest conversation with this person to say, this is how I'm feeling. I'm wondering what might be going on your end of the equation. Are there things happening that I don't understand? And really, like, don't turn it into an interrogation, but rather, the opportunity to listen with the intention of understanding and for no other reason. And, if you're lucky, she might start to reveal things that potentially you didn't know about that are contributing to her withholding the reality of this relationship for her child. And also, if she can't or if she won't, that is important information about who she is and the quality of this particular relationship. And it's, I think, okay and even wise to let a dating relationship go than trying to make it into something that it isn't. And if you want something else for your life, it's okay. And to have, try to have an honest conversation will help you gain that clarity one way or the other. So I hope that helps. Okay, so let's see. In the interests of time here, well, I'm actually going to look at Instagram Live again. We have another listener question. You asked, what is your thought about dating someone new and choosing not to tell your family about your new relationship? Again, I think that's probably a parallel to what I was talking about, with dating as a parent. I think somebody choosing to do that probably has reasons why. It's unclear from your question as to whether you're the one who is dating and not telling your family about it, or if you're dating someone who is not telling their family about it, or maybe it's just a theoretical question. I don't know. But yeah, there are reasons why, and it could be, the person who's not telling their family isn't as serious as the person who would like them to tell their family, or has reservations about the relationship. Those would be my speculations. And so if you're in a relationship with someone who's not telling anybody about it, I would encourage you to try to get to the bottom of that, because I think that honesty is always really important, and will potentially prevent you from going further into a relationship situation that might not be healthy for you. Yeah. Okay, so another question here, and I have to tell you, this last one is such a good one, and I have had this question asked to me probably by 10 different people lately, in 10 different variations. So I'm going with the shortest and sweetest one here. Dr. Lisa, how do I move on in a new relationship and trust my new partner when I was cheated on in a past relationship? There is so much here, and I could honestly do a podcast episode just on this subject, but I think this is a really, really important question, because many people out there dating, particularly people who are a little bit later in life, into their 30s or 40s, there's history there, and many people who are out there dating have had challenging experiences where they've had their hearts broken, or they've been disappointed at the very least. And sometimes people have been quite traumatized by the way that things worked out in their past relationships. There has been infidelity or betrayal or really bad experiences. And so, that changes us, right? And so going into a new relationship, well, in my experience, first of all, there can be a lot of apprehension around even like getting in to a new relationship. I've worked with people who have had such negative experiences that there's a part of them that it doesn't want to date at all. There is just like this, nope, walls are up, not going to do it. And if you're experiencing that level, I would encourage you again to listen to that and not try to make those feelings go away, but rather shift into, why am I feeling this way? How does it make sense? And what would change if I listened to myself? And so in this case, if there's like a lot of avoidance around dating, I would suspect there's a lot of unfinished emotional business. I would recommend doing some serious growth work with a great coach or therapist to crack into processing the relational trauma that you experienced and being able to work through some of the anger and some of the fear triggers. Okay, super quick primer on any kind of trauma. Human beings are miraculous. Human beings are wired such that we're geared for survival. And so whenever we have very, very scary experiences or life-threatening experiences, and so right now I'm talking about like post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? Like you are getting attacked by a bear in the woods or something and you run away. There's this huge physiological response, stress response to that gives you a ton of energy to fight or run away, but it also changes the way that your brain works in that moment. And your memories of that traumatic event are encoded in a different part of your brain than regular memories. And there is capital T trauma when you're like about to die, but there's also little t trauma. And relational trauma is a little t trauma, but is still very significant. I mean, attachment traumas are a big deal. And so because that too creates this physiological stress response, and the memory of this event is encoded in this different part of your brain. This different part of your brain is very interesting in that when you are triggered, meaning like when you experience something that is a little bit similar to the original threatening event, this part of your brain unleashes a emotional reaction that makes you feel very much emotionally like how you felt during that original trauma. So you are often flooded with big feelings of fear, anger, threat, anxiety, and it also creates a similar physiological fight or flight response, which when you think about it is very adaptive. You got attacked by a bear in the woods one time, and now you're in the woods again, and you are in a situation that is kind of like bear environment. And so you are on high alert. You are very anxious, which is good in this case. You have a lot of energy. You're looking around. You're hyper vigilant, which is another thing here. So this is all well and good. But relationally, the same thing happens. So you were traumatized by person A, and now you are in a situation with person B that's a little bit similar, and getting to know someone, maybe being in situations that are starting to feel familiar, right? Kind of moving closer into coupleness. But in this situation, you are getting those triggers and you are having big bursts of anxiety or worry that is creating hypervigilance in you. So you're like, am I okay? What's happening? A lot of those same physiological stress responses. And so on the one hand, it can be wise to be very careful about who you get connected with. And I think it's okay, especially if you've been hurt before, to go really slow and make sure that you are connecting with a safe person as opposed to another unsafe person. But what becomes problematic is when you are feeling unsafe with someone who actually is safe. This can lead to pulling away from a new person or misinterpreting their intentions as being negative or unsafe when they're actually neutral. And in doing so, kind of sabotaging a new relationship before it starts, or withholding yourself from meeting anyone because there's this immediate fear reaction that comes up where you can't even start a relationship with somebody. So, long way of explaining why it's important to do at least some of this growth work before you begin dating, because if you're working with a good counselor or coach, we have ways of helping people actually process some of those emotions and feelings so that you will still probably always be wary, when getting into new relationships, and there might be stuff that comes up for you, but two things will be different. First of all, if you do that personal growth work with someone who knows how to do this, the feelings themselves will be much less. So you may have a twinge of anxiety, but it won't be like a flood of anxiety that leads you to behave in ways that you don't want to behave. And the other piece of this is that through that growth work, you will have the self-awareness necessary for when you feel anxious in these moments, you'll be able to say, I'm feeling anxious right now because XYZ reminds me of this other thing and I'm getting triggered. And then you can either do some relaxation in the moment to calm yourself back down, or, say to your new partner who you've hopefully created an emotionally safe enough relationship, like, this is one of these times that I told you about. I'm actually feeling this right now. And they'll be like, okay, cool. What do you need? And so ways of just managing it. So that's twofold. It lessens, and you know how to manage it if you do the work. So that's one piece of this. But the other thing that I think this question brings up is how we grow in such a way that we can really start to trust people again. So one of it is like managing that fear response, but the other piece is how do I trust again? And in my experience, it is much, much, much less about you being able to trust someone else, but rather, can you trust yourself? So a lot of the work that I do as a coach and as a therapist with people who have had this experience is really helping them feel more in control of themselves and feeling more confident in their ability to keep themselves safe, which I think is much more useful, because you shouldn't trust someone who you don't know or who might hurt you. And so to want to trust other people without really knowing them is not that good of an idea. But when you learn how to trust yourself in relationships, it is a completely different ballgame. So what we would be working on is, first of all, again, doing a serious autopsy. Like, okay, the situation where you were betrayed by your ex, tell me what happened. And this, and talking about it on a podcast right now, like, I can make it sound like it's easy. It's not. I mean, this work itself oftentimes takes months, but we're combing back through what happened in this relationship. Tell me the whole story. And when along the line did you become aware that there was something wrong here? What were the earliest warning signs that your ex displayed that at the time maybe you didn't understand what was happening, but in retrospect were evidence that they were untrustworthy, And sometimes it goes back to that optimistic dating thing that we were talking about before, that there were warning signs that people were like, oh, well, this, I really like them, so it's fine, and so there are almost invariably, when we go back through the story, these kinds of moments that people are talking about in hindsight and recognizing that, yes, their ex was untrustworthy, but the true betrayal wasn't necessarily with the ex, it was with themselves, because they did see warning signs that they often talked themselves out of, or minimized or overlooked, and that was the betrayal, you know. And so those types of things, also doing a lot of thinking around what was the personality of my ex, what were the things that attracted me to them. And I think also sometimes doing some educational work around the things that people often miss, that are, you know, to a trained ear at least, warning signs, but to the casual civilian can actually be seen as like being really attractive, you know. I mean, people who meet criteria for things like antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder are oftentimes the most fun, interesting people you would ever meet. They are charismatic, they make you laugh, they're like extroverted, you know. And so it's like sort of reframing some of these early experiences that people had with certain personality types, where they got sucked in to something that was not good at all. So to be talking about some of those things. Also, I think to be scrolling back through, you know, if you had a time machine, if you could do this over again, what are some of your biggest regrets? You know, what would you be doing differently? And again, a lot of it is centered around times that people betrayed themselves. They had intuitions about things that they, you know, didn't follow, or they minimized their own feelings. Sometimes they were in a relationship where they were being gaslighted, you know, like they were saying things like, I'm uncomfortable, and their ex was like, you're crazy, and they're like, okay, you know. So those kinds of things. What would they do differently if they were met with that again? And so really, like, this is a process of not just healing, but I think self-awareness and strength building that people really need to go through, where they are learning about themselves and developing this new sense of competence and trust in themselves around learning, you know, warning signs and early indicators, but also I think really learning more around how to trust their own feelings and advocate for themselves and assert themselves appropriately in a relationship, so that when they do go back into dating, they can do it in such a way that they are confident in their ability to be a good judge of character and to handle themselves in early dating in such a way so that when they do see some of those warning signs, they will be able to withdraw themselves from a situation that could wind up being emotionally dangerous or re-traumatizing to them, as opposed to what they might have done in the past, which was minimizing it or trying to fix it or hoping, you know, that it would improve. And also, I think slowing down that whole process, because, you know, it's also very easy to get emotionally addicted, for lack of a better word, or infatuated with someone who isn't good for you. Feelings of romantic attraction and infatuation, I think a lot of times people who are dating seek that as like the feeling that they want to have and the indication that, like, green light, you know, this is the person that I'm looking for, when actually those feelings are also just biologically based and are not a reliable source of information, particularly about character. Again, often the opposite is true. People that you feel that like, ooh, butterfly, like excited feeling, are sometimes less likely to have the character qualities that would sustain a really high quality relationship. So, you know, things to look for, which again, sounds easy. It's not. But, you know, through this exploration and education process, we would certainly be talking about what those warning signs might look like, and how to handle it. So again, going slow, paying attention to details, and looking for indications that you are getting to know someone who is at perhaps higher risk of betraying your trust or being an emotionally unsafe person. And some of those indicators may include, although there are many more, people, backing up a little bit, people who are more likely to cheat or lie or deceive in a relationship are more likely to have narcissistic character qualities, which you can kind of ferret out through, are they entitled? Do they come across as having this air where like the rules don't apply to me, like that kind of thing, in small ways. I mean, this can come out in very subtle ways, like cutting in line, or finding ways around. Gosh, I'm having trouble thinking of a real world example right now, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, someone who like cheats just a little bit on little things. The way that people do little things is a tip as to the way they do big things oftentimes. So what you're looking for when you're dating are someone who displays integrity in everything that they do, and who is willing to be like, well, I'm last in line, I guess I have to wait here for 45 minutes like everybody else, like that is what you're looking for. Other tips that they may potentially be an emotionally unsafe person would be, in addition to that like kind of entitled quality, small displays of selfishness. Whatever they are doing is more important than whatever you're feeling or needing or doing. Little things like, you try to text them once and they get back to you 2 days later, and oh, so sorry, I was at work. Again, like there could be a lot of reasons for that, but at the core, to be thinking about, they were busy, and the fact that I wanted to talk with them didn't matter as much as the fact that they were busy, so like paying attention to stuff like that. Also, if they are avoidant, like if they are uncomfortable with talking about more serious or personal or emotionally challenging things, that is an indication that they may be more likely to cheat, because in relationships, people who have a tendency towards an avoidant kind of dynamic, they will not talk about their feelings openly. They will not honestly say, hey, I'm wanting to improve this, or I'm having this problem in a relationship. Can we work on this together? No, instead they will not talk about it and become sort of increasingly resentful over time, and they will have all of these reasons why they can't talk about it, which is going to be related to you and the fact that it doesn't matter anyway. So people who are avoidant tend to create these big narratives in their minds about who the other person is, that then makes them feel that their bad behavior is valid, entitled, warranted. Like they sort of build up a case for why it makes sense in their minds. Not always, but avoidance is a big tip-off. And similarly, if you're meeting someone new who is talking really negatively about their ex, that is another indication that they may have that relational style. Another one is if they are hedonistic or really sensation-seeking, like they are drinking too much or driving motorcycles real fast, like that kind of thing can be a tip-off that they may be more inclined to indulge their impulses. So the list goes on and on and on. Actually, in my I don't know if I think I've mentioned this before, on growingself.com, we do a online dating program where, there's like different activities and things, but I spent a whole chapter talking about like relationship warning signs. And so this is just a few that I wanted to give to you. I think honestly that these are some of the biggest ones, that, and also people who have very poor boundaries. So people who are like on the first or second date wanting to tell you all about their childhood sexual abuse or the details of their divorce, or like all these crazy things, or like rushing into intimacy really quick, or like you go out on one date and it turns into like stay the night and hang out for brunch and let's go do stuff on Saturday, and hey, it's Saturday, let's go do something else, and like, so you go to a first date on Friday and you don't come home until Sunday night. That is a major sign that there is potentially going to be a very, very rocky road ahead of you if you get involved in this person. So those kinds of things. So figuring out who am I and what are the vulnerabilities that I have that could lead me into getting involved with someone who is unsafe, but also I think just basic education around what to look for and what not to look for. I think that when you do that kind of work, you can then go into dating and a new relationship from a place of confidence, and it becomes much easier to trust other people because you trust yourself. One last question from Instagram. Is it okay to date people who are older than you? I'm 45 and I just don't seem to click with women younger than me. I'm attracted to older women. Is this okay? And the short answer is yes, it's absolutely okay. If everybody is happy and it's working well, continue. Godspeed. There's no issue. The times when it is an issue, big differences in age when you're dating, really have more to do with either your culture or your stage of life. And so what I mean by culture, people are a product of their life experiences, and we often think of culture as being related to where you're from or your ethnic or racial identity or your socioeconomic level, and certainly all of those things do impact your culture. But culture is also created by the time that you are from too. And so what you can sometimes see in people with significant differences in age is that they are culturally different because they came from different places in terms of the era in which they were growing up. And so, that can contribute to differences in core beliefs, outlook, expectations, ways of doing things, ways of communicating. Certainly, if you have a Gen Xer trying to date a Gen Zer, like there's a difference. So all of that, but also what I have seen that can be problematic is that when people with a big age difference are in two different stages of life. And so like the classic example would be a woman in her late 20s or early 30s who is dating a man who is in his later 40s to early 50s, who may either have had his children and who are now close to grown and does not want any more, or is not interested in starting a family at this stage of life. And not always. I mean, I have also seen people with that kind of split have beautiful lives together if they are on the same page about what they both want. And so sometimes that looks like having a wonderful time together, child-free, and being wonderful companions and traveling and enjoying each other's company and having a great time, or doing the family thing together, and much fun is had by all. So it can work, but when there are just big differences and it turns into obstacles that feel insurmountable, sometimes, as much as people like each other, it is not a good fit for those reasons. But in your question, you imply that it does work for you, that you like being with older women, and you're not mentioning anything about those differences. And so if that's the case and everybody is enjoying it, then Godspeed. So thank you so much for all these wonderful questions. And I had a great time doing this on Instagram Live. My tentative plan is to be recording these podcasts from now on. I'm thinking probably noon Mountain Time on Mondays. I usually record my podcast on Mondays anyway. And I'd like to do this again. I don't know if it'll be a forever thing. I might decide to do something else later, but next week I'm going to be on Instagram at noon doing this again. And if you would like to join me, I hope you do. If we're not connected yet on Instagram, you can track me down, Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby on Instagram. You can also follow Growing Self on Instagram, growing_self. This podcast is available at the Growing Self website, growingself.com, as as well as all the usual suspects in terms of where you listen to podcasts. And next week, I am going to be talking about how to handle dark emotions in a healthy way. We're going to be talking about emotional health and self-acceptance and using your emotional awareness for positive things. And I hope you join me. If you have questions in advance, you can ask them either on Instagram or through Growing Self. And thanks for listening. I'll be back again soon. All right. Bye-bye.